Hey there, and welcome back to Health, Wealth, and Happiness. I'm James.
I'm Joe.
So, we had a guest on the show last week, Joe Zalius, and we spoke about a Japanese concept called Ikigai, which he described as living with purpose and a reason to get up in the morning. Joe began to explain to us that it comes from doing something that truly makes you happy, and it intrigued both of us. So we went away and we Googled it. And the same image kept popping up all the time, this Venn diagram with 4 circles crossing over each other, and in each segment covered a different aspect of your life. And smack bang in the middle was this word called Ikigai. So this led me down this wormhole that is the internet, and we came across our next guest, Marc Winn, who designed this image, which has since gone viral. Books have been written, documentaries have been made, online courses have been created, and it's even being discussed in the World Economic Forum. So without further ado, welcome, Marc. Good to have you on board.
Nice to be here.
Fantastic. So let's dive into this straight away. Who is Marc Winn?
Marc Winn, oh gosh. I think to understand me, the kind of potted stories, I grew up in a wealthy family in a tax haven called Guernsey. Sorry, a low tax jurisdiction called Guernsey. I also spent time growing up in Africa. My family, my dad particularly came from a tough background in Europe, so left school at 14, made something of himself. So I had very conflicting narratives growing up. This narrative of get a good education and make a lot of money. Someone with no education made more money than the people telling me that. But I also saw some of the downsides of success. Growing up with a kind of alcoholism and some of the negative traits. So I grew up very conflicted about the world. Grew up questioning, and built a business in my 20s. A health company with my brother. Had 2 nervous breakdowns during that process. Recreated the model somewhat, but was relatively financially successful after that decade-long process. And then I spent since then coaching and mentoring entrepreneurs how to build businesses that are aligned with purpose rather than just necessarily being successful. And then latterly I've worked on the whole country of Guernsey in terms of what it takes to redefine success as a nation, and how do we move from a tax haven that is purely wealth as a measure of success to one that focuses on well-being and what really matters at the end of that journey of success. And somewhere in that story, I did a random blog post where I changed one word on an Ikigai diagram, on a purpose diagram with the word Ikigai, and it turned into a global phenomenon of taking what is a kind of Japanese concept, but redefining it and merging it with quite a Western view of what purpose is, to bridge 2 worlds. But yes, so that's potted story.
Just to start off with, have we said that right? Have we said Ikigai right? That's how we pronounce it?
Ikigai, yeah, I think so.
Ikigai, yeah.
Obviously, not being Japanese, I'd probably murder it as well.
So, what is it? What does it mean?
Well, so I've since I've had been on kind of many podcasts and stories and conversations with people that actually have been to Japan for longer than a day. And they talk about, from the Japanese perspective, they really talk about this essence of life, this reason for being. So it's a bit deeper than what necessarily the Venn diagram would talk about, but it's around this profound, deep sense of meaning in everyday life, and that can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Or in other contexts, they may call it dharma. In the West, we call it purpose. Those things slightly, I think you would have to understand Eastern tradition to truly get the essence of it, because they would see something like sacrifice as something completely different to the West, and finding meaning as you look at Japanese culture in terms of it's very controlled and ordered, and so what that culture finds meaning and purpose in may be slightly different to what the Western context of purpose and meaning might be. So there's depth and nuance and stuff around purpose and Ikigai and Dharma and those kind of things that really is part of the global collective exploration around meaning.
Okay, so how did you, obviously you said before that, you know, the financial side of things, you know, you tick that off, but then you sort of realized that you wanted to find a deeper level of purpose. Mm-hmm. And I assume this is obviously where this all started, this Venn diagram and your model of this. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the Venn diagram itself was 45 minutes of my life, but let's but I suppose what created the Google was the life story up to that point. Right? I was in deep questioning and deep inquiry that there was still a black hole in my existence, in my own definition. You know, I was living, as one of my good friends would say, somebody else's life. And whilst it may appear on the outside very successful, all of the trappings of success, but for me, it wasn't the true expression of who I was. And I think it's really important to understand that in working with so many people in the past 10 years is what works for me in terms of what I find meaning and purpose in could be very different to what works for you. And I think that's an internal journey and an internal story and an internal reflection about what that means. And actually the Dharma thing is quite interesting, is because your karma influences your Dharma, that they often say. And so it's only when you truly accept yourself and integrate your entire past from that place of full self-acceptance, do you start to understand what your true path in life is.
Was there a moment, you know, a moment or, you know, in the past where it all just clicked for you and, you know, it all made sense?
I think, I mean, there's a sequence of steps of realizations in life, but I'll tell a story of one moment that really was probably one of the largest moments of self-acceptance, I would say, that triggered a lot of my work in the last 10 years. I was reading a book called The 4-Hour Work Week, which is a Tim Ferriss book that a lot of people read. And I think one of the things of being deeply unmotivated in life for a long period of time, but still able to function, is that two strengths that I had growing up was, one is always finding the shortest way to do something, and two was being able to manipulate other people into doing things for me. So constantly called lazy at school, constantly called lazy all the time. And then when you're reading the and had that kind of psychological story around you're bad because you're X. And in reading the 4-Hour Work Week, what I saw was someone teaching people to live a more meaningful and purposeful life by working less and creating time. And suddenly it took me 6 months to get off the ceiling, because I realized, you know what, I'm never going to get anywhere in this world by being something I'm not. And so what I realized is that capacity to find the shortest route to do something, and that capacity to mobilize other people, can be used as an extraordinary force for good in people's lives. And it turns out that the number one thing entrepreneurs suffer from is not having enough time. And here you have as a complete expert at delegation and time creation. Who knew? And you know that. But that self-acceptance drove my meaning and drove my purpose. But it was really, but that would have been a very different story of self-acceptance for me as it would be for you. So it's usually those things that you hate about yourself when you start to redefine what they mean. Those things that you resist the most are often the places where the largest pearls of wisdom lie in your purpose, in your future. So the question is, what don't you like about yourself, and why? And
there's loads we can talk about.
Yeah.
What I don't like about James.
Or... That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Well, that's only gonna help Yeah, but that says more. So what you don't like about him says more about you than him.
Oh, there you go. Back on you now, Joe, buddy.
I feel like this is therapy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's the
I mean,
point. Finding purpose is a
Yeah.
therapeutic process.
Yeah,
You have to do it. Yeah. Do the work to find it. Right?
Yeah. I watched your TED Talk on the Dandelion Project, and
Yeah.
you started the presentation with a minute's silence and 5 words on the screen.
Yeah.
What were they?
They were. I'm a bit softer now, but so they're the words "you are going to die." So I did open a TEDx talk for 2 reasons. One, I think, you know, it was good to make the audience feel more awkward than me. So holding a minute's silence with the word "you are going to die" helped deal with my fear of public speaking, but also it meant I had to talk a minute less. So the laziness, that TEDx talk was quite good. 1 minute was a minute's silence. 3.5 minutes was playing another TED talk.
Yeah, no, I saw that bit. Yeah.
So a third of my TED talk was done before I'd said a word. So it was, it was the classic modeling of the less is more, the less is more approach.
So what did you mean? Okay, so what do you mean by "you are going to die"?
Well, I think if you understand, you're going to die. And in the West, we particularly live from this place of fear of death, so we never try and think about it. I often say when I'm working with people, it's, when you've made all your money and you've got it all in the bank, in your 60s or whatever, half broken from all of that struggle, what are you going to do then before you die, right? And usually people have never properly thought about that question. So, ultimately it's really the only question to ask is, we're here for a finite period of time in this life, depending on what your persuasion is. I think it's really, 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 really important to think about the end to start the beginning. And if you haven't gone into a deep personal inquiry about what you want in this life, you're really a subconscious passenger to life, and you're never really going to find that sense of deep meaning and purpose as easily if you don't question why on earth you're here.
So you saying then, right at the start, you were saying all about you've got to find acceptance in who you are and acceptance in general. You saying that you've got to go all the way to the end and accept what's going to happen there, and then go back to.
Wait, if you're not accepting, you're going to die. Right?
Yeah.
That's a big part of life you've not accepted yet. Right? And so if you're resisting it by not thinking about it, you're fundamentally not accepting life. Right?
Sure.
And so this is about how you can't discover life until you accept the reality of all of it. And this would be at the heart of Buddhism or the heart of many traditions, many more peaceful traditions, right?
So as soon as you've done this, right, obviously, clearly you've done this yourself, Mark. You've clearly done. How has your quality of life been different to when you were pre-acceptance compared to where you are right now? Where's your headspace at now?
Well, let's just say as someone who's doing lockdown with 3 young children right now, I would say acceptance is an ongoing process, and they're always it's never done, right?
Sure.
As my kids are rightly demonstrating right now, there's bits of stuff that I don't accept. Chaos ensues, and I'm still not always peaceful in the hurricane of young children. But that's. Yeah, I mean, it's a continual cultivation of growth and acceptance, right? And the more we inquire and the more we feedback on all of the triggers, all the things that had us move away from grace, the more we discover our stories, our lineage, our past, and the things that what makes up our subconscious patterns, because our responses are often developed in the first 7 years of childhood, our automated responses. And so we have to go through the process of reprogramming those responses with wisdom and reflection and contemplation. And as we reflect of our childlike patterns that govern our life, and we start to apply wisdom to those automated childlike patterns, we start to become wiser as human beings, and more grounded, and more accepting, and more going from controlling life to flowing with the river of life. And a real sign of well-being and happiness and purpose is one that can move with the river rather than one that tries to splash around swimming upstream, right? And I think this is the process of acceptance of what is in terms of purpose, and all these kind
Well,
of things.
okay, drop the mic. Fair enough. Okay, Joe and myself, and all the guys who are listening in right now, how can we discover our true purpose or Ikigai? How can we go about doing that?
Right. I mean, as I've said in the conversation, first you need to explore what you're resisting, and under those stones lie the wisdom that's required to truly know yourself. And when you know yourself, you'll know what to do. Right? Most of us have no idea who we really are. Right?
So how do you find that? How
I
do
mean,
you get to that stage?
But it's not a classic destination thinking. That's the old model of success. I was being playful. It's a journey, right? And you discover life on the journey. So this journey of inquiry is about, and the day by day acceptance that there is no destination other than death, none that matters, and that learning to just enjoy yourself on the way to death is part of.
I guess the question there, Mark.
There's a great book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who wrote that in the one of my kids just coming into the podcast.
Excuse me 1 minute, exactly the same. I've got
lockdown
someone knocking on my door. I don't know where my missus is because the kids are in bed.
So a year ago, I'd have got really stressed by that.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Thanks to lockdown, hundreds of interruptions. One has learned to find peace with it.
I guess the question there, Mark, is that for someone who's struggling to accept, what would your advice be there for those who are struggling to find acceptance to then find purpose? What would your biggest advice be to those people?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the emerging theory on how to get past struggle. So a lot of people re-traumatize themselves and live in this perpetual trauma and holding on. So a lot of the emerging science is that you actually need some form of high state. You can't solve the problem at the level of consciousness that it was created. So in some ways, you need some mechanism to support you to shift the consciousness that you're in. So that could be in one level meditation, or it could be standing on top of a mountain in nature, or it could be psychedelics, or it could be whatever, depending on what mechanism you wish to use. I'm agnostic to the state-raising mechanisms that people use. But ultimately learning to shift your own consciousness when you go into contemplation and reflection helps you pass through the struggle much faster than if you did it and we all know this, right? So if we're in a tired or in a bad mood, then our state is quite low. We're going to react to things much more than if we're well rested, asleep. So the thing is to do the reflection on the struggles of life in the high states to then make our base state much higher. And so it's all around that dance between capturing the triggers in day-to-day life when they happen, and then taking it into some kind of high state process to reflect and review and gain wisdom. Trying to deal with it at the time when you're triggered isn't very easy, whereas capturing a trigger is a little easier, and then taking it. I always hold a trigger list, and I write down every day what was the things that triggered me today, and then I'll sit in a jacuzzi or something and or a steam room, and then that's my high state tool.
So
start to reflect on them.
So is your message in all of this, right? The whole acceptance and everything else is becoming desensitized by everything, essentially, because it just doesn't matter, because you're all going to die.
Well, I would say it's resensitizing, because most people grow up close-hearted because they're told they're bad, they're naughty, their heart's shut down. And we learn to suppress emotion rather than feel emotion. So we're all in our heads, not in our hearts. And actually, one of the great things about this process is that your heart starts to open and suddenly the definition of life starts to increase. You can love much deeper, you can cry much harder, you can. So it's an interesting paradox. It's not avoiding life. It's facing the emotion and the challenge of life. And we're often taught to check out, or to watch Netflix, or to avoid, or never face death, or all of this discomfort. But transformation is around the passing through the emotion rather than the avoiding the emotion.
Okay. So I'm intrigued. Quickly, I'm intrigued. So how are you harnessing this method? This method of finding purpose and everything else into these entrepreneurs and business owners within their businesses?
And that's what I used to do. Now more societally.
Okay.
As it turns out, one of the number one factors in longevity is Ikigai. That's where it comes from, the blue zone thing. So if you want to live a long and healthy life and avoid chronic disease, find purpose. So in health system transformation, which is more kind of a whole system transformation, which I work on now, also work with businesses, is if you're building a high purpose business for 10 years, or you're building a high purpose government, you're going to get better employees for less money, that work better, that come up with better ideas from their high states. There's no downside to meaning, right? If you want to make more money in this world, be more purposeful, because the radical transparency is there. If you want the best employees for the least money, and you want the lowest, because Elon Musk can outmarket the whole car industry from one Twitter account, right? Number one reason, purpose, right? And so this is a money-making tool. It's a success tool, but if you do it inauthentically, it won't resonate. And so one has to live one's own authentic path to create that resonance. Because we all know when someone's wearing a mask, right? We don't quite connect with them. And so the truth is you've got to be wholeheartedly out in the world living who you are as a business owner and a business runner. And if you're not, all of your cost of marketing, all of your cost of staff, all of these back end costs that really you push swimming upstream rather than flowing with the river, it's all linked to profitability at the end of the day. So that's the way of joining it. And the same for society, right? If you don't have deep meaning and profound meaning in society, taxes go up, social cohesion goes down, and as what you've seen is Britain and America right now, with the deep purposelessness of their very Western Anglo-Saxon economic models, are really starting to break down with coronavirus and these kind of things, whereas the more cohesive societies that have a deep collective meaning and purpose are responding far faster. And there's a direct correlation now between the more purposeful societies and their virus response.
So tell us about what you mentioned earlier, the work you're doing, or you've been doing for the past 6 years in Guernsey in relation to this.
Yeah, I first learned about the possibility of a pandemic in 2013. And I started to realize many pandemics, it's the technology to make more of these is in the public domain. So it's not a question of just one virus. It's what happens when lots of people can make viruses. It's the deeper question about the structure of society. Then it becomes an even more interesting question is if one person who feels disaffected by society, by the meaninglessness of society, can now create this kind of harm with technology they can buy from Amazon. What do we have to do as a society to make sure that no one is in pain and disconnected? And that's the real.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you see that someone has been working in a biotech company or government biotech lab for a Korean dictator or something like that, and there's no meaning in it, they're just being taught to do something, and they're very angry and frustrated with life. They now have the capacity just to release something to create a lot of harm. And so our models of governance that control us into living a deferred life, right? You've got to earn money to pay for things to then live something in the future. So that person is doing a job in the biotech facility to pay for the money so that they can be successful, right? Which is where the anger fuels over time. You start to understand how our systems are creating the risk, and our lack of meaning lies at the very core of the risk. And for us to survive as a race, and climate change is a product of this as well. If you think about overconsumption around people who overeat or overconsume are covering up for a lack of meaning, right? And so once you start to understand that this is fundamentally connected to the breakdown of the earth, the biological systems on the earth, we start to understand its role in collective transformation and changing the very systems that we operate on. So I spent the last 6 years in a small self-governing state to work on the transformation of all systems.
So do you believe the pandemic that we're in right now is manufactured?
No. The data about this one would suggest that it's a product of human consequence rather than human design. The early information is it's coming out of one of the markets in China, having a lot of species from all over the world in one place has created a virus that's jumped up with the species. So it is a human consequence, but it would the data about this particular virus would be that it's a human accident rather than human design. But the technology to create these viruses by human design is also available.
What you're saying though is that this Ikigai and finding purpose is, if everyone has that in society, they're less likely to go and personally manufacture something like this and do something
less likely to cause harm.
Yeah.
So if you look at why someone like Trump goes to power, it's like clearly someone who hasn't accepted himself, and what's the unintended consequences of our pain and our shadow, and how that gets amplified on society is that we face a crisis of wisdom, right? And we've gone through the era of democratizing knowledge, and now Wikipedia and everything has all of this knowledge available. We're going through the algorithmic era of democratizing intelligence, where we're seeing all of these consequences of very smart people doing very silly things. You have to look at the algorithmic elections in the UK to understand the consequences of social cohesion being manipulated to create election issues. And so with great power comes great responsibility, as Spidey would say, and we have these tools that are exponentially increasing in power, but unfortunately we need the wisdom to go with it. And this is where contemplation and purpose and meaning and fear of death and all of these sort of things start to come into play. Because if you think about it, the virus would disappear in 2 weeks if we all just went inside. But because we're afraid of death, we're suddenly running around trying to fix it all. Right? Whereas if we all just said, you know what, stop, let's go inside, it'd be gone in 2 weeks. Right? And this is the notion of the war on biology, is we're trying to fight something that we should surrender to. And it will take as long as it takes for humanity to realize that before it stops. And sadly, it will create a lot of mess in that process of collective surrender. So it's interesting. Nature's designed almost the perfect response to climate change.
Is that what you think this is?
Well, I would say, that's what it's becoming. Whether it's a random effect or a non-random effect is quite interesting, but it's doing that job. Because all of the climate activists, all the climate movement, all of those things have not done what that virus has managed, which is a product of nature, has managed to achieve on its own. Right? I leave that as a playful, mischievous provocation as to maybe the Earth is quite capable of healing herself.
So, Mark, what's the future for you then? Obviously, is it continuing the societal sort of purpose-driven approach? Is it, or have you got different projects that you got lined up? What's the future?
I don't know. I tend to move with the river, but I sense that I've got 3 kids, so
How old are the children?
9, 4, and 2.
Okay.
Wife, when I fully get out of this compound, who knows? I may go and eventually hug some people and get back to connecting, and then hopefully in a few weeks this island will be virus free, and we can start to do that. And then who knows? And then there's maybe other islands to support. But yeah, I mean, for doing more of these types of conversations to support people in the journey to collective purpose. There's a lot of inner work for us all to do. I'm on that journey like anyone else.
So if you could do it all again, what advice would you give an 18-year-old Mark?
My favorite question is, what if it was easy? Everything is difficult until it becomes easy. And that's, I would say, if that was going to be on my gravestone, it would be that question. We're suffering from individual and collective overcomplication. And that 18-year-old who saw the world as a lot more complicated than it actually was, saw his own life as a lot more complicated as it was, just needed someone to put their arm around him and just say, this can be made, you can make this easier with a shift in perspective, right? And I had the power all along to shift my perspective on the world I was living in, and that would be a piece of advice. But I wouldn't change a day, because I wouldn't be who I was unless I lived every moment I lived, and I like who I am now, and that really, and I'm quite bored of repetition, so to go and live the same life twice. I just watched Groundhog Day the other day. I think it's the key.
Probably not the best time for watching that.
Oh no! My challenge. This is the point: is to face the story rather than resist the story. Groundhog Day is the absolute perfect film to be watching.
How many times did you watch it?
It's meta, isn't it? I only watched it once, but to glean all of the wisdom around isolation and repetition from that film. So if there's one thing I would encourage every listener to do as a result, is go and face the darkness, because there is death. It faces death within that process. It is like everything. It is basically the isolationist guide to transcendence in isolation through the medium of a great Bill Murray film. And so if you want to see the process of wisdom unfold in isolation or repetitive isolation, then Groundhog Day is basically the doorway to the new world.
Fantastic. Before you know it, you'll be on TEDx as well. So there you go. Where can the listeners find out more about you? Where can they go and tune into you?
Oh, urban myth. No, probably I would say go visit marcwinn.com. Marc is M-A-R-C. Thanks, Mum. Lots of people get that wrong, and Winn is W-I-N-N. So marcwinn.com. It links to my blog and my other sites and everything I'm doing in a highly minimalist way, as you'd expect. Hopefully the story of Guernsey and the community will start to surface in the world, and it isn't really about what I do, it's more about what this island is achieving collectively. That's probably the more interesting emerging story, rather than how the island got to that place. It's kind of the formative now of community emerging, and the power of possibility.
Hi, Marc, it's been great having you on.
Yep.
And I've certainly enjoyed it. Yeah, it's been eye-opening.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Keep moving.
We'll see you in the next one, guys. Cheers.